Namaste. Today we are continuing our lecture on Servlet technology. In previous lecture we have seen that what is Servlet technology, what are the advantages of Servlet technology, how the basic functionality of Servlet works, and then we have compared the applets and Servlet. Now in this lecture we are starting our lecture with the Servlet life cycle. So, in the Servlet life cycle, there are basic phases which are given below. First is Servlet class is loaded. After the loading, Servlet instance is created. Then init method is invoked. Then the next step is service method is invoked. After the service method, destroy method is invoked. So this is a sequence of methods which are called during the execution of the servlet, which is init, service and destroy, and these are the main methods of the servlet. So let us see in the diagram form. First step is load the servlet class. Like after the loading that class, the object is created of the servlet class. Then call the init method. This method will be called at one time when we initialize the servlet. Then call the service method. Service method of servlet will be called whenever any request come into the servlet. This method will be called according to request. After serving the all requests, the destroy method will be called for destroying the different threads, memory allocation, etc. So this is the life cycle of the servlet, and the basic methods are init, service and destroy. Init is called when the servlet is initialized, and service method is called when any request comes into the servlet, and then last destroy method is called. After this we will see the working of the servlet. So let us start with the working. First we will see what is a web container and how it plays the roles. Web container is responsible for managing execution of servlets. When a request comes in for a servlet, the servlet hands the request to the web container. Whenever any request comes, it will be handled to web container. Web container is responsible for instantiating the servlet or creating a new thread to handle the request. Whenever any new request will come, web container will create a thread for that. It's the job of web container to get the request and response to the servlet. The container creates multiple threads to process multiple requests to a single servlet. Servlet don't have a main method. Web container manages the life cycle of the servlet instance. In servlet, we are not using the main method, but instead of main method, we have init method, service method and destroy method. Now see step by step. The first step is the user sends the request for a servlet by clicking a link that has a URL to a servlet. Whenever client click on URL, like for example google.com, right? So this request go into a web container, right? That is the first point. Client request for any web page. Now in the next step, the container finds the servlet using the deployment descriptor and creates two objects. After receiving the request, web container finds the servlet according to that request, because web container have so many servlets, right? So web container find the particular servlet for this request from the deployment descriptor. Deployment descriptor is a web.xml file in which all servlets are inserted, means the entry is there for their request response, right? The servlets are entered in that web.xml file with the URL pattern. Web container will find the servlet using this deployment descriptor, right? And after finding the particular servlet, it creates two objects. First is request and the second is response, right? And these two objects are HttpServletRequest and the second is HttpServletResponse. After creating these two objects, it moves to third step. In third step, then the container creates or allocates a thread for that request and calls the servlet service method and passes the request response object as argument. After finding the servlet, it will pass this thread to the service method of servlet, right, and passing these objects request and response as arguments, right. This is the third phase. It creates a thread. It passes this thread to a service method with two parameters, request and response. After this, the service method then decides which servlet method doGet or doPost to call based on the HTTP request method sent by a client. After service method, it will decide which method should call doGet or doPost. This is depend on the user by which method it invokes the service method. Suppose the client sends the HTTP GET request, so service method will call the doGet method. So we can see in the diagram the servlet called the doGet method because client send the request using the get method. After this, then the servlet uses response object to write the response back to the client, right. After calling the doGet method, it will write the response into a response object and send back it to a container. After this step, the container send this response to the client. So this is the last step. After the service method is completed, the thread dies and the request and response objects are ready for garbage collection. After serving the request, there is no need of request and response objects. So by calling the destroy method, these two objects are destroyed. So this is the entire working of the servlet. So let us fast rewind these steps. First, it requests for a page from the web container. Then web container will create a thread with two objects, request and response. Then according to the request, it will call the servlet service method, right. And after the service method, doGet or doPost method is called. After the doGet and doPost method, response will be written in the response object and the response will be sent to the client. After sending the response, request response objects are destroyed. So this was the working of the servlet, right. Today we have seen the life cycle of the servlet and working of the servlet. In life cycle of the servlet, there are main three methods that are init, service and destroy. We have seen these three methods, how these methods will work in working of the servlet. In next lecture, we will see how to work with servlet, means how to create the servlets, then the directory structure of the web application, and the deployment descriptor elements, means what are the elements included in the deployment descriptor, means web.xml file. And then we will finally see how to implement the servlet classes in web application. Thank you.